It was just another quiet evening on Green Street, Enfield. The year was 1977. The London borough of Enfield, a modest, working-class suburb about 10 miles north of the city center, was lined with rows of council houses, uniform brick facades, narrow front gardens, and the occasional child's bicycle leaning against a gate. At number 284, nothing seemed remarkable. The Hodgson family lived there, a mother and her 4 children, eking out a living in a rented home like thousands of others in the area. Life was hard but ordinary, until quite suddenly it wasn't. Over the next 18 months, this modest terrace house would become the epicenter of one of the most infamous alleged hauntings in modern history. A case so strange it drew national headlines, captivated paranormal researchers, and divided opinion for decades to come. Strange noises, furniture that moved on its own, voices that seemed to come from nowhere, or from the mouth of an 11-year-old girl. Some called it Britain's most convincing poltergeist case. Others dismissed it as nothing more than an elaborate hoax. But everyone agreed on one thing. What happened at 284 Green Street was unforgettable. Tonight, we open the case file on the Enfield Poltergeist, a story that still asks more questions than it answers. What really happened inside that house? And was anyone telling the whole truth? Peggy Hodgson had lived at 284 Green Street for a few years before things began to unravel. A single mother in her mid-40s, Peggy was raising her 4 children, Margaret, 13, Janet, 11, Johnny, 10, and Billy, 7, on her own. The children's father, their mother would later say, hadn't been much help and had long since left the picture. Life on Green Street wasn't easy. The Hodgsons lived on a tight budget, like many families in post-war Britain. The house itself was small and sparsely furnished, but it was home. Neighbors would describe the Hodgsons as ordinary, even shy. Peggy was reserved but friendly, and her children, though energetic, were respectful and well-liked in the neighborhood. The 2 girls, Margaret and Janet, were particularly close, often playing together in their shared bedroom upstairs. There was nothing to suggest that the family might one day become the focus of national media attention. By all accounts, they were simply trying to get by. Yet those who knew them would later note how deeply the events of 1977 seemed to change the Hodgsons. What began as occasional, unexplained noises quickly spiraled into something far more unsettling, and the family, some believed, was never quite the same again. Even years later, Margaret would describe her childhood in 2 parts, before the Enfield haunting and after, and it all began with a single, strange sound in the middle of the night. It was August 30th, 1977. Peggy was downstairs finishing up her nightly routine. Upstairs, her daughters were already in bed, whispering to each other across the darkened room as they drifted towards sleep. And then they heard it, a faint knocking sound. At first, the girls assumed it was coming from outside, but then it came again, louder this time, and seemed to be coming from inside the room itself. They called out to their mother. Peggy came up, annoyed at what she assumed was just her daughters being silly. But she soon heard the knocking herself, rhythmic, deliberate, and growing louder. Suddenly, the chest of drawers by the girls' bed began to slide forward, scraping against the floor. Peggy pushed it back, but moments later, it moved again, as though someone or something was forcing it toward the middle of the room. In a panic, Peggy gathered her children and rushed next door to her neighbors, the Nottinghams. Vic Nottingham, a burly man who lived with his wife and son, came over to investigate. But even Vic, a man not prone to superstition, said he couldn't explain what he saw and heard in the house that night. The knocking continued, clear and unbroken. At one point, Vic called out, demanding the unseen presence to stop, and the knocking fell silent, before resuming moments later, even louder. By now, several neighbors had gathered outside, watching uneasily as the Hodgsons and Nottingham stood in the front garden, unsure what to do next. Someone suggested calling the police. When Constable Carolyn Heaps arrived, she made her way into the house and began her own inspection. In her written report later that night, she would state that she heard unexplained noises and even saw a chair move across the kitchen floor without any visible means of propulsion. It was enough to leave everyone unnerved, but there was little more the police could do. After a while, they left, telling the family to get some rest. But rest wouldn't come. Over the next few nights, the strange occurrences escalated. Toys and books flew through the air. Bed sheets were yanked from the children while they slept. And always, the relentless knocking. The Hodgsons didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Their home and their lives were about to be thrust into the glaring light of public scrutiny. The Hodgsons didn't go looking for attention, but attention came anyway. Within days of the strange activity starting, word spread through the neighborhood. Friends, neighbors, even strangers began showing up outside the house at all hours. Whispers of a haunted house on Green Street caught the interest of local reporters. On September 4th, 1977, a journalist from the Daily Mirror, Douglas Bentz, and photographer Graham Morris were sent to investigate what they assumed would be a short human interest piece. They were expecting pranks and exaggeration. Instead, they claimed to witness chaos. During their visit, toys reportedly flew across the room without warning. A Lego brick, according to Morris, struck him just above the eye, hard enough to leave a noticeable welt. The pair were so unsettled that they returned the following day, this time bringing along a recording device. What they captured over the next several hours were sharp knocks, loud thuds, and disembodied sounds, none with an obvious source. Morris continued to take photos, several of which would become iconic in the years to come. One of the most widely circulated images would show 11-year-old Janet Madare at her bedroom, arms and legs extended as if levitating or being thrown. Skeptics would later argue it was just a jump caught at the right moment. But believers saw something else, a genuine physical disturbance beyond explanation. Soon, the Daily Mirror had more than a quirky ghost story. They had a headline and a phenomenon. The paper ran the story. National interest followed. TV crews showed up. Journalists camped outside. The Hodgsons, once an anonymous family on a quiet street, were now under siege, not just by whatever haunted their house, but by the world watching it happen. And it was only going to escalate. With the media frenzy in full swing, help arrived in the form of two men from the Society for Psychical Research, Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair. Both were respected members of the SPR, a British organization founded in the 1800s to investigate paranormal phenomena using scientific methods. Maurice Grosse was the first to respond. A man in his late 50s, Grosse had joined the SPR after the tragic death of his daughter, seeking meaning in unexplained phenomena. He was earnest, methodical, and at first skeptical. He moved into the Hodgson home in September 1977 and began documenting everything. Guy Lyon Playfair, a journalist turned paranormal researcher, joined shortly after. Unlike many outsiders, Playfair didn't dismiss what he saw. He believed something was genuinely happening inside 284 Green Street, and that it defied rational explanation. Together, the men began keeping detailed notes and audio recordings of the disturbances. They recorded over 180 hours of audio. These tapes documented tapping and knocking sounds that seemed to respond intelligently to questions, as if the source could hear and understand. Furniture slid across floors. Doors opened and closed on their own. Objects disappeared and reappeared in impossible places. One event involved a curtain twisting around itself tightly while the room was empty. In another, a heavy armchair moved 4 feet across the floor, in full view of the investigators. The activity seemed to center around Janet. The youngest daughter, just 11 at the time, frequently experienced trances, violent thrashing, and bizarre speech patterns. She was often thrown from her bed or found in rooms she didn't remember walking into. At one point, Janet was recorded speaking in a voice that was clearly not her own, gravelly, masculine, and claiming to be a man named Bill. The investigators brought in specialists. Microphones were hidden. Cameras were installed. Voice analysts, including speech therapists and parapsychologists, examined the tapes. Those skeptics pointed to potential ventriloquism or attention-seeking behavior. Others were less sure. Some experts noted that the voice seemed to originate not from Janet's vocal cords, but from her false vocal folds, a feat not easily produced, especially by a child. Despite accusations of fakery, Gross and Playfair remained convinced that something unexplainable was occurring. They stayed with the family for months, becoming trusted figures, documenting, analyzing, and enduring the strange happenings alongside the Hodgsons. Their conclusion was cautious but firm. Not all of it was real. Some of it might have been exaggerated, but much of it they believed could not be faked. The voice began suddenly. One evening, as Janet lay on the sofa, she seemed to slip into a trance. Her eyes rolled back. Her body went still. And then a deep, guttural male voice emerged from her mouth. "I'm Bill," it said. "I died in that chair." Maurice Gross immediately began asking questions. The voice responded. It claimed to be Bill Wilkins, a former tenant who had died in the house years earlier. Gross, intrigued but skeptical, pressed for details. "I went blind," the voice growled. "Then I had a hemorrhage and fell asleep. And I died in the chair in the corner downstairs." The details were oddly specific. Gross and Playfair later traced down a man named Terry Wilkins, who confirmed that his father, Bill, had indeed lived in the house and had died in precisely that way, a brain hemorrhage in a chair downstairs. Janet, according to her mother, could not have known this. More recordings followed. The voice of Bill would often emerge during long sessions, sometimes for hours. It swore, joked, and occasionally answered questions. Skeptics believed Janet was faking the voice, possibly using her false vocal cords to create the illusion. And indeed, Janet later admitted to faking a few incidents just to see if they'd catch me. But speech therapists brought in by the SPR noted how difficult and potentially damaging it would be for a child to sustain that voice for extended periods. In some sessions, Bill spoke for over 2 hours. More puzzling still, the voice often emerged when Janet's mouth was closed. In one recording, she drank water while the voice continued speaking. Whether it was a hoax, dissociative behavior, or genuine phenomenon, no expert could say with certainty. But the voice became one of the most debated and chilling aspects of the entire case. From the beginning, the Enfield case divided opinion. For every person convinced the Hodgsons were experiencing something extraordinary, there was another who believed it was nothing more than an elaborate ruse. Even some visitors to the house reported catching Janet and her sister Margaret bending spoons and hiding small objects, seemingly to create mischief. A BBC camera crew once left their equipment running while the family was left alone. When they returned, one camera had been mysteriously damaged, but no clear evidence of supernatural activity appeared on tape. Other skeptics pointed to the sheer amount of media attention as motive enough. The family was featured in newspapers and even appeared on television. Critics argued that the girls, particularly Janet, enjoyed being at the center of it all, the attention, the sympathy, the sense of control. Janet herself later admitted that she and her sister sometimes faked incidents to see if anyone would notice. But when pressed, she insisted that only a small portion of the activity was staged. "You couldn't fake all that," she would later say. Investigators noted that while some phenomena might have been pranks, others happened under tightly controlled conditions. And not all of it could be easily dismissed. Janet's ability to produce the strange, gravelly voice for hours at a time baffled speech experts. The recordings of knocking sounds, which seemed to come from inside the walls and ceilings, continued even when the girls were out of sight. Objects still moved when no one was near them. And then there were the witnesses, police officers, reporters, neighbors, and SPR members who testified under oath that they saw and heard things they couldn't explain. Renowned American skeptic Joe Nickell, who examined the case years later, argued it was simply a combination of teenage mischief and credulous investigators. Yet even Nickell conceded that the sheer volume of reports from credible witnesses was unusual. For believers, the skepticism only underscored how inexplicable the core events really were. For doubters, the occasional hoaxes tainted the entire story. The Enfield case became, and remains. A perfect storm of belief and doubt, evidence and ambiguity. Perhaps that's why it has never been fully resolved. While outsiders debated the authenticity of a haunting, life inside 284 Green Street grew increasingly difficult. For Peggy Hodgson, the relentless scrutiny and fear took its toll. Friends later described her as perpetually exhausted, chain-smoking in the kitchen late at night, worn down by the constant noise, the endless visitors, and the strange events she could not stop. The children, too, showed signs of strain. Margaret became withdrawn. Johnny developed nervous habits. Billy, the youngest, began wetting the bed again. Janet, at the center of it all, seemed to suffer the most. She was reportedly bullied at school, called names, and accused of lying. Neighbors whispered behind her back. Reporters hounded her for interviews. The nightly disturbances left her sleepless and on edge. During one medical examination, a doctor noted signs of anxiety and physical fatigue in the young girl. In one particularly frightening incident, Janet was found wedged tightly on top of a radio in her bedroom, as if something had lifted her there. In another, she woke up tangled in her curtains, unable to explain how she got there. Whether caused by external forces or psychological stress, the strain on Janet's mental and emotional health was obvious. Even when the activity began to wane, the family never fully recovered from the ordeal. They remained in the house, but life was never quite the same. Peggy would later say the haunting changed her and her children in ways they didn't fully understand. And though some questioned their motives, others saw a family struggling to hold itself together under unimaginable pressure. For the Hodgsons, it wasn't just a story. It was their life. By late 1978, the disturbances at 284 Green Street began to decline. No one could pinpoint why. There was no dramatic final confrontation, no exorcism or ritual. The knocks and thuds simply became less frequent. The strange voices grew quiet. Objects stayed put. By the spring of 1979, life inside the house was almost normal again. Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair gradually withdrew their daily presence, though they remained in touch with the family. Even after the investigators left, minor incidents were reported from time to time, but nothing like the terrifying intensity of the previous 18 months. Some speculated that the activity faded as Janet entered adolescence, suggesting the poltergeist was somehow tied to her emotional state. Others saw the decline as proof that the family had grown tired of maintaining a hoax. But the Hodgsons never moved away. Peggy stayed in the house until her death in 2003, insisting until the end that she had never lied about what happened. Today, the current occupants of 284 Green Street report no unusual activity at all. The house is just a house again. But for those who lived through it, the silence only deepens the mystery. Did something finally let go? Or was it all, as skeptics have long claimed, nothing more than an elaborate and temporary deception? The question lingers unanswered. In the years since the last knock faded on Green Street, the Enfield Poltergeist case has become a fixture in the annals of paranormal history. It remains one of the most thoroughly documented and widely debated hauntings ever investigated. Over 30 eyewitnesses, including journalists, police officers, and trained researchers, testified to seeing or hearing inexplicable events. Hundreds of hours of audio and dozens of photographs remain as evidence, even if none are conclusive. For believers, the Enfield case stands as powerful proof of something beyond our understanding, a reminder that not everything can be explained away. For skeptics, it has become a cautionary tale about human credulity, media sensationalism, and the blurry line between belief and reality. The story has inspired countless books, articles, and documentaries. It has been dissected by psychologists, paranormal investigators, and even playwrights. In 2016, the case reached a new audience through The Conjuring 2, a Hollywood dramatization that took considerable liberties with the facts, but reignited interest in the real events behind the film. Guy Lyon Playfair, who co-authored This House is Haunted, remained steadfast until his death in 2018 that much of what he witnessed in Enfield could not have been faked. Maurice Gross, who passed away in 2006, held the same view. Janet, now in her late 50s, has largely stayed out of the public eye. In rare interviews, she has maintained that while some incidents were exaggerated or staged out of desperation, the core of the story was real. "I know what happened," she once said quietly. "And so does my mom. And so does everyone who was there." Whatever the truth, the Enfield Poltergeist continues to fascinate. It endures because it defies easy answers, caught between fact and folklore, between evidence and doubt. And perhaps that is its greatest power. Today, 284 Green Street looks like any other house on the block. Quiet, ordinary, unremarkable. No crowds gather at the gate. No reporters linger in the street. No voices echo from the walls. And yet, the questions remain. Was the Hodgson family the victim of a cruel, unexplained force? Or were they, as some argue, architects of one of the greatest hoaxes of the 20th century? The files remain open. The mystery endures. What we do know is this: something happened here. Something that changed lives, divided opinions, and left behind one of the most compelling unsolved stories of our time. What really happened inside 284 Green Street? That, it seems, is a question only the house can answer. What do you think of today's story? What dark chapter should we open next? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like and subscribe. Close the book if you can. This is Black Chapter.